Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to delve into some foundational concepts within Git. Git provides a ton of operations and functions that we can use, but honestly, on a day-to-day basis, we really only use like a handful of operations. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to basically look at what is a common workflow of using Git. You'll kind of get introduced to those functions that we use, but we're not going to really go deep into them. This is more about giving you kind of a high-level conceptual mental model of how we use Git on a day-to-day basis. All right, so what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about how do we start a project with Git. So this usually includes either initiating a Git repository from scratch at the beginning of a project, or we need to go and we need to actually make a copy of a project that already exists that is being version controlled with Git. 2, we usually start making changes in these projects. So we need to understand how do we track changes that we make, how do we save those changes, and then also how do we kind of get a status update on what are all the changes that we've made so we can decide which ones we actually want to go ahead and save versus those that we may not want to. Next, once we've actually saved some changes that we've made, we need to push these changes back to the main repo. So we'll look at how we do that. Also, there may be other developers working on this project and they've made changes, so we need to know how do we pull in those changes that they've made so that we have that on our local copy of the repo on our computer. And we're also going to talk about a little bit more of a complex approach where we actually kind of make a new version of the project for us to kind of work on. We call this branching. So we're going to kind of create a sandbox for us to kind of maybe do some experiments in. And then once we finalize the code that we want to write in there, then we need to actually go ahead and merge that branch back into the main line of code, which we call the main branch. And then we're going to hit on a couple other components that are worth noting. All right, so my main objective here is just to kind of give you a good overview of this workflow, not really delve too deep into the details. So whether or not you want to try to code along as we're doing this, or just kind of follow along and kind of get a feel for how this workflow of using Git works is perfectly fine. So let's get started. All right, so say we are starting a new project from scratch and we want to use Git to version control. Say I have a directory for this project all set up. We'll call this project A. What I need to actually do is to navigate to that directory using my terminal, the command prompt, or whatever editor that you're using. And I need to actually type git init. Okay, so this simple command initializes a new Git repository within that project. And so now you've actually set it up where version control will be tracking and recording all the changes that you made for that project. But probably more commonly, what if you are not starting the project? What if a project's already been created and you're actually going to collaborate on that project and make contributions to it? So now what we need to do is we actually need to go ahead and do what's called cloning an existing Git repository. So for example, say that we have project B hosted on GitHub, which is very common, and we'd like to go ahead and contribute to this project. We simply navigate to where we want this local copy of the project to be saved on our computer. And then what we do is we use git clone and then the URL for that repository. So this command is going to download the entire repository and all its history to your local machine, giving you a copy of the project to work on. All right, so now that we've covered how to either initialize a project or to go ahead and get a copy of a Git version controlled project, now let's jump into what are the next steps that we commonly use with Git. So once we have a project either initialized or cloned on our local computer, now we can go ahead and make changes wherever we want. So for example, say in project B, I want to go ahead and add a new .py file that has some functionality in it. What I can do is once I've made that change or I've added that file, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stage these changes. Okay, and we can do that with git add and then the name of the file that we are either adding or that we've made changes to. So we call this staging. And staging simply means I am marking those changes as ones that I want to track and eventually save. Okay, so once I'm ready to save these changes, then I do the next step, and that is git commit -m and whatever message I want to add with that commit. So commit means to actually create a snapshot or record your changes along with the descriptive message that you provide within that git commit command call. Now, sometimes when we are working on a project, we have made changes to several files, okay? And we may not always remember what we have staged or what we have committed. So it's useful to be able to kind of check the status of our repository to see what changes have been made and what is the status of those changes or those files. And we can get those updates by using git status. All right, let's go ahead and do a quick example here. I'm going to go into project B here. And I'm going to open up my VS Code editor. All right, so we can see that there's not a whole lot in this project. We have a simple README file, but no other scripts or functionality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a new script. It's just called hello.py. And in here, we're going to create a very simple function that allows us to create a greeting for a user. Once we have that, we've made our change. So we've added a script and we've added a function. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we want to stage these changes to be prepared to save or to commit. So let me go ahead and do add hello. So I have added that or staged that file. And now I would go ahead and do commit, and I can add a commit message. So I'm going to just say add greeting function. And now we have made our commit or made a snapshot in time of a change that we've made in our code base. Let's go ahead. I'm going to make one more change here, and I'm just going to add a doc string, and I'm just going to say greeting function. Now, before I stage this, let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do git status. Recall that status provides basically a status report on any files that have been changed in a project. And you can see in here, it says changes not staged for commit. It says modified hello.py. So notice that I made a change to this file, and it's saying there's been a change here, but this change has not been staged yet. So let's go ahead and now stage this. We do that by git add. And now if I do git status again, see now it says changes to be committed. So notice that there's been changes that have been staged and ready to be committed. And it tells me that the file that's been changed is hello.py. Now let me go ahead and do another commit. And now if I do git status again, you see it shows nothing. So at a point, you may make multiple changes to different files, and git status allows us to see what changes have been made into what files, and have they been staged or have they not been staged yet. All right, so as the project progresses, you're likely going to be working on various features, bug fixes, enhancements, or whatnot at the same time that other developers are making changes to that project. So that means you could have multiple developers creating different features, different bug fixes, and so on. So this is where branching in Git becomes invaluable. So branching allows you to work on isolated tasks without affecting the main code base. So it's kind of like setting up a separate workspace or a separate sandbox environment that allows you to kind of experiment and write code that's not going to affect the main code base. So to create a new branch, we can use git branch and then the branch name that we want to provide it. So this command creates a new branch with that specified name, but it doesn't actually move you into that branch. So if you want to move from the current branch, which with Git, the primary branch that you typically operate in is main, and then we branch off and have kind of, feature branches, bug fix branches, and so on. So to kind of navigate from one branch to another, or navigate from main to this new branch you just created, then we need to do git checkout and the branch name, and that'll move you into that branch. Now you can actually create a new branch and switch to it at the same time with a shorthand, and that's git checkout-b and then the branch name. So that's going to create the branch and move you into that branch all at the same time. So once you've created a new branch, you can now start creating your modifications. So the nice thing about branching is, say I go through this process of adding code, but it doesn't perform as necessary, or we just decide the code isn't something that we want to add into the main branch. Then we can always just delete this branch and it never impacts the main branch of our source code. Now, in our case, we want to keep this new code that we added in this new branch. So once we are satisfied with the changes that we've made, then what we actually want to do is we want to merge this branch back into the main code base of our project. So I can do this by going back to the main branch and then typing git merge in the name of the branch that I want to merge back into the main branch or the main code base. So this command integrates the changes from the specified branch into the main branch. However, merging isn't always a seamless process, unfortunately. So if Git detects some kind of conflicting change, so like let's say you made a change and another developer made a change, and you guys are trying to merge this back at the same time, there can be some conflicts we run into. Now, when that happens, Git is going to let you know that there is some kind of merge conflict that exists. And in such cases, we need to actually go ahead and we need to resolve these conflicts. And this gets a little bit more complicated. We'll talk about this in later videos. But for right now, just realize that we can actually have conflicts, and Git will kind of let us know where those conflicts exist. Branching and merging are powerful features that enable collaboration and parallel development in Git. So whether you're working on a new feature or fixing a bug, branches allow you to kind of isolate your work and do development without affecting that main code base. And then merging allows us to go ahead, and once we're finalized our code advancements, we can go ahead and merge those changes back into the primary branch that we care about. All right, so let's go back to this hello.py and this hello function that I have. And let's say I want to make a change to this. Now, rather than just make it directly in the main branch, and notice one thing down here in my terminal, it says project B git and it shows main. I am operating in the main branch, but let's say I want to switch to a different branch to make these changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say git checkout /b. Now recall that this is kind of a shorthand to make a branch and then to switch into it. So I'm just going to name this feature yell. And now you can see I'm operating on the feature yell branch. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify this function just a little bit. And I'm going to basically add an option to yell. So I'm going to go ahead and just have greeting equals that right there. So now what I'm going to say is I'm going to say if yell, then I want to return greeting dot upper, else just return the normal greeting. Okay, so we added our new feature here. And so I want to go ahead and I'm going to stage and commit this. So git add. I made the change to the hello file. I'm going to go ahead and commit this. Add yelling feature. Now I have gone ahead and saved these changes in the feature yell branch, but I actually want to go ahead and go back to the main branch. So I'm going to do git checkout main. And now what I want to do is I want to merge in those changes. Now notice, you may or may not have noticed it, when I switched to main, now I went back to the old code that was in the main branch prior to the changes that I made, okay? So I've got the old code and I actually want to merge those changes that I made in the other branch into this branch. So now I'm going to go ahead and say git merge, and I'm going to say feature yell. And you see 1 file changed, 6 insertions, 2 deletions, and now we can see in our hello.py it has made the changes that we made in the previous branch. All right, so as a project matures, there's usually many updates made, which means there's many commits that have been made to that project. So it's often pretty useful to kind of see what that commit history is. And we can do that in several different ways. So one way is, whether it's in the terminal, the command prompt, or your editor, you can always use git log, which is going to show you a chronological list of all commits made in that project. So another way is, depending on your editor of choice, you can often see the commits made a few different ways. So for example, in VS Code, I can use the Git Lens extension to see the commit history along with a bunch of other information. I can also click on any line of code in the project and see who last made any changes to that line and when. Now, when we use GitHub, we can also see a lot of this information. So let me go ahead and take the recent changes I made to project B, and I'm gonna push those changes back to GitHub. So let me stop there because we're introducing a new command here, and that's git push. What git push does is, we're gonna take any changes that we made to our local repository on our computer, and we're gonna push that to the remote repository, or another way of saying that is push that to GitHub where the main project is hosted. And that will push that repo, that will push my changes up to GitHub. So now when we go into our repo on GitHub, we can see the commits made for each file and when, and we can see the overall commit history. And we can even see if we have more than one branch, along with seeing all the code that is specific to that branch. All right, so I've covered the basic workflow that we use with Git. So basically, we initialize a project when we start a new project, or if there's an existing project we want to start working on, we need to go ahead and clone that repository to make a copy on our local machine. Next, once we've made changes to a project, now what we're going to want to do is we're going to actually want to stage those changes to prepare them to be saved. We can do that with git add, and then we can go ahead and use git commit to basically create a snapshot, or in other words, just save those changes that we've made. And we can always see the status of any changes we made along the way with git status. Now, as projects become more complex and we get more people working on them, it's usually pretty good to work in an isolated branch or a dedicated like sandbox environment to make our changes. And we can do that by using git branch to create a new branch for us to work in. And once we've made our code changes and we're ready to merge them back to the main code base, we can do that with git merge. Now, once we've made all the changes that we want to make locally and we are done working on that project, we often go ahead and push those changes back, and we can do that with git push. Now, git push is usually used to go ahead and push those changes back up to GitHub. Now, sometimes another developer may have made changes on that project, and that is in GitHub, but we have not actually pulled those changes to our local copy on our machine. So to do that, we use git pull. And lastly, we can always see the commit history on a project using git log or some other mechanism, whether it's through our editor or looking at GitHub. All right, so now before we wrap up, I just want to quickly discuss kind of a crucial component, and that is the .git folder. So when we initialize a Git repository, this creates a hidden .git folder in that project. So this hidden directory contains all of the inner workings and the metadata that make version control possible. So at this stage, it is not important by any means for you to understand all the details behind the Git folder and all the contents inside. Just realize that they contain critical information for Git to do its job as version control. So bottom line, do not delete this folder once it's been created for a Git repository. All right, there we have it. Hopefully you now have a little bit of a better mental model of how we work with Git on a day-to-day basis. Now in future videos, we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into some of these concepts, and we're also gonna introduce some new concepts not mentioned here that are focused around Git and also GitHub. All right, until then, happy coding, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for future tech tutorials.